Hi everyone, my name's Jonathan Soden. I am the gallery that works with Halima, where we've had the opportunity to display the virtues of unity. Halima's going to give a talk and PowerPoint display, but if you've got any questions during the talk, please feel free to ask any questions. Kind of encourage people just to ask. Be a bit of an interactive chat. We've got a microphone, which I'm wearing at the moment, but we'll hand it to one of the ushers. So if you do want to ask any questions, because we're recording it for the internet, and we can play back. So if you've got any questions, just get the mic. So yeah, I'll introduce you, Halima Cassell.
So a bit about myself first. So I'm born in Kashmir, and parents went on holiday because they were living in Manchester at the time, and they went for a long holiday. So I was born in Kashmir during that period, and just before I was born, I came back to the UK and lived in Manchester and studied and worked in the northwest in Lancashire. And like I was saying, the last 10 years I've lived in Shropshire, which has been lovely because it's been great bringing up the children in the beautiful landscape. And I think being brought up in the northwest and with all the beautiful architecture in Manchester and Liverpool were the kind of things that really inspired me, and having my kind of cultural background with pattern and geometry, which really inspired me. So education, sorry, I've got not to say I say that. So my education was very art-based. The two main subjects I really enjoyed or excelled in at school were maths and art, and they're the two that I focused on. Influences that I've had whilst I've been studying and growing up have been the inspiration around nature, natural formations, architecture, and the artists that I've really enjoyed or have had impact in my work have been artists that use maths and optical illusion. And also I've always loved North African surface design on the buildings and textiles and jewellery. So just as you know, when you're a child and you're inquisitive, you kind of look at the formation of things quite deeply, and I think that had a big impact on me, and it still does. I love plants. I have quite a few in the studio, and watching things grow and how they unfold are always really quite a big part of what I do. Architecture, my love for architecture has always been, again, since childhood, and still now, just going away and visiting churches and cathedrals and mosques and synagogues is a really important part of my travel, and looking at the structures and the elements related back to nature, natural formations of geometry. And I think the hand-carved, the hand element of the intricate patterns that are created in these beautiful buildings are the things that, for me, in architecture, what live on. So you have lots of interest in architecture, but the ones what really live on are these beautiful buildings what have so much handcrafted elements to them. So from the very simple, the structure and the formation, to the very complex, they're all really beautifully constructed. So artists, even though I did a 3D course, artists that really inspired me were Bridget Riley, MC Escher and Victor Vesarelli. And I love the optical illusion and the movement they created through maths and static paintings and drawings within their work. And again, I think when I was studying for my degree, I did a lot of research in African surface design and looking at really complex surface design, but when you deconstruct them, they're made out of very simple shapes, which then make the design a lot more simpler. And I think my work kind of resonates from that. When you look at a formation of a plant, it's just a simple shape that's been repeated in a formation of a certain type. So So virtues of unity came, the whole idea of the installation came to me whilst I visited Pakistan for the first time in my mid-30s, 34 actually, and I went there back just to revisit where I was born or where my parents came from, and just to have a sense of belonging, and also to do some research that I wanted to do at the time, which was based around the paisley pattern and the mango motif, you know, the whole origin of the kind of motif itself. So I went to Pakistan and to do that research and to reconnect. But during my time there, everyone always introduced me in all the establishments, no matter where I went, which university I went to, they always introduced me as a foreigner from England. Halima Cassell, not Halima Cassell. So I questioned their kind of introduction a couple of times, and all of them would say, "But you're from England. You live there. You work there. You know, your family's there. You know, you're English. You know." So they didn't consider me, even though my ancestry was from there. And when you've grown up in Manchester all those years and you've been called a foreigner, and so it was this feeling of displacement and not knowing. It's the first time I properly questioned my belonging. And so when I came back to the UK, that's when Virtues of Unity started, this idea of questioning my belonging. My work in general is not political, or is not questioning anyone apart from connecting to pattern. And so Virtues of Unity started then, and I started collecting clays. So at first I had a few exhibitions around Europe, in Brussels and in Germany and Switzerland. So I was collecting clay myself. And then as the installation grew, then I've relied on other people bringing me the clay back from the countries that they're traveling to, whether it's work, whether it's a holiday or seeing family. So the clays come in various consistencies. Some have been refined beautifully through machines. They've been purified and they're wonderful to use, and you're confident. And some have been dug out by local village people, where they use it for basic pottery within the villages. And then others have just been wildly dug from different places. So they come with all sorts of impurities and, you know, donkey hairs and plastic and stuff like that in the clay. So I try and use the clay as it's given if I can. But if it feels whilst it's wet, it hasn't got that kind of plastic, or it hasn't got enough strength to it, then sometimes I add a little bit of ingredients into it to make it withstand the way I work. And also with the clay, as you can see with this work, the clay, I work with the clay in a very similar way, where it's very soft with the carving. My normal work, I sharpen everything very detailed, with very, with burnished shoulder edges, so the detail's really pronounced. But with this work, I keep with a soft kind of finish with all of them, so they kind of work together and as an installation. And so some clays, I mean, all the clays are natural in the colour, and sometimes you don't know what's going to happen with the clay. So some have residues, and some have like certain kind of pigmentation, what kind of change a lot depending on what temperature you fire the clay. All of them actually have holes in them, and at the time that I started the installation, I was pregnant with my first child, and this questioning of what I believed before I went and felt, before I went to Pakistan, and when I came back was this questioning about my child and being pregnant. And it was probably one of my most important times, I would say, to date in my life, being pregnant. So I felt this overwhelming kind of sense of this whole, this spherical form, the vessel, this connection to this oldest form, which is being used by man since, since early man, and the vessel has so much kind of meaning to it as well. So creating a vessel was really important for the installation, and the whole, this idea of motherhood, the birth canal, this kind of spherical form, what represents the world, the earth, you know, planets, was all kind of connected with the kind of initial kind of shapes and forms that I was carving. And so the designs that I carve into them, or the way I carve into them, depends how confident I am with the clay. And that can vary. Sometimes pieces have to be made more than once. So when I was working with the Pakistani clay, it carried on cracking. And I realised the clay from Pakistan, because when I was there, if you do clay, it's the lowest form of art that the universities were doing, which was a contrast to being in Japan, where if you did ceramics, it was the highest form of art you could be doing. So in Pakistan, when I went there for the initial kind of research trip that I was doing, the sculpture departments wanted me to be in their department, because my work, with the way I was working with clay, but I chose to be in the ceramics department. But what I found was clay was very undeveloped, or not as refined as many other clays that I'd used over the years. So I had to make that piece 3 times because it carried on cracking. So then I had to dry it out and then break it up again and then rehydrate it again to make a new piece. But each time I would add in a bit more ball clay in it, a bit more grog, or a bit more paper fibres, or just to strengthen the clay, because it would crack in the drying process. So each clay has its, you know, qualities, and when you've been working with clay for so long, you tend to feel those as you're working with them. So the most difficult clays that I've worked with have been the Pakistani and the Welsh clay. So this is a German clay. So the clay, they come with various different kind of like aggregates within them, and some are very smooth, some are very coarse, and each one, I forget where this clay was from. I think this was from Belgium. So each clay, each piece is named to do with a virtue. And when I started off with the idea and the titling of the installation, I didn't think I would have enough virtues to name all the ones you wanted to create. And then you start looking at virtuous words, and different places around the world have different virtues, what are important to them. And then you realise that actually there's lots of virtuous words. And if I do run out, because I'm hoping that eventually at the end of the project that I will create a piece for every country of the world and where clay is possible. And so yes, the names, I've collected quite a few, and if I do run out, I can translate them in different languages. So going back to the whole, as I was carving the whole, my initial reasons were this kind of fulfillment of, you know, being pregnant and creating this kind of feeling I was having. But also, as the installation grew, these holes were quite important because the light transmitted through the holes kind of illuminated the next piece, and that was really important because I think as human beings, you know, we transmit energy, and you know, when we're feeling full of positive energy, we transmit that positive energy. When we have a lot of negative energy, we can transmit that. And I think this idea of transmitting light and energy to one another was really important. So the holes may vary depending what kind of division I've done on the piece. And if the division is 7, then it's got 7 holes in it. If it's a mirrored image piece like this one, it only has 1. And if it's an abstract piece, then it has as many as the piece has. So, and you can see from this close-up, the clay isn't as refined as my normal work. I try and keep the softness of the clay, or whatever the clay is doing, to the surface. But as a whole, this one was very smooth clay, I think the clay was from Mississippi River, so this was quite a smooth clay, which had been refined, so it didn't have any impurities in it. So going into pattern for me as a child and growing up, and then all my research around pattern. I mean, when I was at university, at the time, pattern and surface design wasn't fashionable, and and I was told, it was about more abstract. And for me, I kind of, because of the research I was doing in African design, pattern for me was, I don't know, somehow connecting to me personally, and it's always been important for me within my work to follow what I feel instinctively to do, rather than to do what's fashionable or what's selling or what's, so that's always been really important, to follow what I want to do rather than what's expected or what's, what's showing at the time. So pattern for me, as this installation has travelled and as my work's developed over the years, has been about a language, what's universal. So when people see the installation, they start relating different designs and different elements to different cultures or different places that they've been. And I think this language or pattern, from early caveman to, the different cultures and different parts of the world, pattern has been a universal language, and one what's understood, when people have their kind of amulets and motifs and, flags, and this kind of idea of pattern has been really important. So I've kind of documented all the designs as I'm doing them, and I think because of the patterns, you don't need to be of any age to appreciate them. So as installations travelled, you get children from 2, 3 enjoying the installation, to mathematicians, to engineers, to architects enjoying it. So I think the work for me has been really important because it's connected to a wider audience rather than a specific audience. And when it was in Manchester, it was there for a year, and I think they were really pleased with the kind of audience that it was attracting, with people who wouldn't normally go to museums to see things, but they were getting a new audience coming in, because again, I think that kind of whether you look at the installation as a whole, or you look into the inspirations behind it, it could be understood at different levels. So I'm just going quickly through the design. So this clay was from Costa Rica. So each clay has its story as well. So this clay was, when the exhibition was at Manchester, somebody came back from Costa Rica who's living out there, and they saw the installation and they felt really connected to it because they were living out there with their children, and they come back to see family in Manchester. And they got me some clay from Costa Rica from a waterfall, and the waterfall was connected to a volcano further up, so when the debris came down, it kind of washed into the waterfall and down, and then the slurry it created over time created this clay. So this has literally been dug out from the waterfall, and she bought I think it was 15 kilos, and they shared it in their suitcases when they came. So each clay has a story, and some stories are more interesting than others. And a friend brought me some clay back from Cuba. She was doing a charity kind of journey, as well as she kind of mixes things up, and she was doing a salsa course, dancing course, and she during her trip travelled out to this area where they said there was some clay in this farm, this field in the farm, and she dug some up, and it had all sorts of debris in it, and she carried it back And she came back and she carried it on her hip, and it was like a U shape, you know. So she gave me this bag with a hip shape in it, and another a lecturer from university brought me some clay back from Iraq. Son was a diplomat there, and she made it clay. She couldn't get clay because of the restrictions there, but while she was in the spa, the spa manager, she was talking to him, and she said she was looking for clay, but she knew she couldn't get some. And he said, well, he knows somewhere in the desert where he can get clay from. So on his day off, he went into the desert and he got me this beautiful clay, which was milled in this big kind of milling mechanism within the ground of the desert, and the beautiful pictures. And yeah, so it had a lovely story to it, and he brought it back to where she was staying. And when she went through customs, the guy in his official suit and a machete was chopping through it to make sure there's no bombs or drugs in it. And as he's chopping through it with his official uniform, saying how much he loves doing pottery and when he has spare times, you know, so there's stories like this where it makes everyone really real with the clay, rather than, you know, it's a beautiful material that people from all over the world, from different backgrounds, just connect to, from using, you know, plates every day to the cups, to sculpture, to buildings. So it's a beautiful material that resonates with so many people. So the clay is, again, varied from so many different colours. I think the most difficult one is black, but there is clays that have kind of a lot of pigment, what when fired turn them to black. So shards, with Jonathan, I mean, over the years I've collected the shards since doing the installation, and there's been this idea of the process that I go through, the reflection and the memories of creating something, but I've always collected them as a kind of idea of the process that I go through. And this year with Jonathan, we've made these lovely wall pieces that almost like small sketches of my thought process in creating the pieces. So, and I think as an installation, they kind of show that kind of process. So they've been shown over the years in different ways. So I thought I'd just talk a little bit about the process. Has anyone got any questions about the Virtues of Unities before I go on to the process?
Can I ask about the sketchbook?
The
sketchbooks?
Yeah, sketchbook.
So are they a before or an after thing? Are they just documenting what you've done, or are they you exploring? Oh, sorry.
A mixture of both.
Yeah.
A mixture, because I sometimes have to change the design because the clay is not allowing, or it's a bit difficult to use, so I have to go for a simpler design. So it's a mixture of both, because normally once I've made the shape, you kind of get a feeling of what you can and can't do, and once the shape and the form is made, you can then try and do what you want to do, and then if it doesn't work, you have to start off again. And so yeah. So there's 4 processes that I go through making, and through whatever pieces I'm making, whether it's installation or clay, whether I'm working in stone or other materials, the processes I always do are very formatted in my thinking process. So I always start off with a form, no matter what shape it is. Having a form is then like a canvas to what I can then map my design or think for how my design is going to fit on there. So I could do lots of sketches in my design book. So making the form is a very slow process, because the walls are either solid or very thick, so they can be several inches thick. And if you get any air bubbles in, all those hours of working then can result in an explosion. And so I'm very careful when making the form, and I spend a lot of time making it as perfect as possible, because the more perfect the form is, the easier it is to map a perfect design around it. So I tend to spend, I would say, on this size piece, this is a piece I was doing for the Hepworth Museum. This piece would have taken about a week and a half to make, because as you're building it, it's got about 85 kilos of clay in it. So you've got to make sure you're building it and it doesn't break down and or squash, because if you use too soft clay and you carry on building on top, then it will squash the form. And then getting it all as level as possible is really important. So if I've got several pieces to make, then I tend to make all the forms at the same time, because it's the same thinking process. The second stage is designing, whether this is relaxing in the garden whilst designing or with a bottle of wine. Yeah, but this stage I design for the form that I'm working with, and in this particular case, this is all the virtues, again, sketches. But I design for the form, but at this stage I eliminate what might work and what might not work, because I think sometimes when we're designing, we always think about any problems, what can occur, or will it work or won't work. But for me, I eliminate that. I just enjoy the process of designing and exploring mathematical kind of variations of an idea or design that comes to my head. And through that, I come up with, you know, I never repeat the same design. So there's never a design in the nearly 30 years that I've worked has been repeated, because each time my mind's somewhere new. So is it always a new design, or there's a new commission or a project, so that brings in new ideas. So mapping is a bit like making the form. I have to really concentrate and really make sure the mapping and the lines as precisely as possible. So I put a grid in and around the form or shape, or whatever material I'm working with, in this case the clay, and mapping everything on as perfectly as possible is really important. And again, this stage I really I don't drink any wine at this stage. Or you know, I don't have lots of, when I'm designing, I have music on, I can be with people. I did a big commission one year, and I did all the design work because my partner drove to Switzerland. I did all the design work whilst we were driving, and whilst I was sat in the botanical garden, or But when you're making or mapping, that's where you kind of have silence and you're concentrating. So, like the designing, the carving for me is very meditative and really exciting. I have, it's a very slow process. So during that time, again, I have friends around, I talk, I have music. I can have the phone attached to my top and, I could be talking away, but I could do that because it's a very slow process. And the clay tends to be past leather dry when I start, or a bit more. And towards the end, as you can see, it gets harder and harder. So the construction of piece never deforms or alters, because you're working with the consistency of the clay. So the edges on the bottom are very sharp, or very pointy. So you're always working with a sponge underneath. So you can tell with the different clays, the different finishes, is a different quality that the clay has. How raw the clay was when it was given. And like I was saying at the beginning, the installation itself has toured. This is at Yale in America. It's toured to lots of venues. I think this is its 13th venue. And the idea is that it carries on travelling and eventually going abroad to different countries, because the message that I'm trying to convey in the installation is the virtues as a human race that we all share, and the similarities that we share, and rather than the differences between the texture of our skin, our hair, which the clay has, and the things what unite us are more, than what divides us. And if we look at that, then, I hope that message, I know whilst installation has travelled, that a lot of people who have seen it have really connected to this idea of being able to accept that they belong in the country that they've been working and living in for 25 years. But it's amazing how people said they've not felt like they belong. But for me, when I started this project and questioned myself, you know, we have been a migrating species since early man. So, sorry.
Hi, Halima. I'm just wondering, looking at that slide, how the actual installations themselves, we've all got like sort of linear display, where this is very much different way, but how has that changed over the...
Well, that's normally the really exciting thing, because each venue has different restrictions, different possibilities, different lighting, because normally you'd have a lot of lighting to bring the work alive. Like when you see beautiful architecture, you know, it looks different in the evening light and it looks different. So lighting, but because this wonderful lighting, having this projection of lighting, having space, when it was at the Watts Gallery in Surrey, they had a very narrow space, but they had a balcony so you could view the pieces from top, which is beautiful. So each venue has a different, and I always work quite closely with curators. So, and for me, this has been quite exciting because I love cityscapes. I love, you know, the basalt shadows, you know, the formation of the stones. And this was very, very different to any way it's been displayed before. So working with the venue and working with what, I suppose, what budgets venues have sometime as well, because obviously there's no, you know, building new plinths for whole installation is not a problem for some venues, and for other venues, you know, it can be a kind of constraint. So I mean, at Yale it was lovely because it's 2 L-shaped, so people walked in and around it. The height of it was lovely, and the wheelchairs could get in and out. So yeah, so it was good. And again, the colour formation is always is drifting. So this colour formation was quite interesting to do because you're working with all the different levels. This was in Aberystwyth University, and this sculpture done in the 70s was really interesting. And that's why it looks completely different there. The lighting, again, was directional because there wasn't that much, actually there was natural lighting there. I think this might have been taken in the evening. But again, what colour plinths you put them on depend on how the work reflects with the surroundings. This was at Fitzwilliam Museum, and again, this was lovely because, but it was too high for people in wheelchairs, and for younger children because the barrier of the step was to keep. Yeah, so there's different ways people, because there's Julian Stair, who's a really famous potter. He had big vessels there which were unglazed. So as a whole, the exhibition looked amazing, but how things are viewed within the installation changes again from venue to venue. So these are tall vessels that look nice in contrast with the big vessels. This was in Cannon Hall Castle in Scotland, and again, this was an unmanned area, so it had to have perspex on. But it had the lovely mirror, so things were reflected because the lighting was quite, the lighting wasn't very strong in there, but having the mirror reflects any lighting onto the pieces and underneath the pieces quite beautifully. So it's displayed very different, and I think that's the exciting thing about the installation, is that it changes, it's growing. I mean, from when it was here, it's got about 50 new pieces, so it kind of, Manchester put on a spherical plinth to represent the world, and it's quite low, so people in wheelchairs and children could see it, but then if you're really tall, you have to bend down. But you know, it's, I think each venue shows it as it suits the space. And that's always exciting for me because it's never the same. And each venue it's gone to over the 13 venues, there's always a new piece, whether there's 1 new piece or 7 new pieces, is always new because the installation is constantly growing. So at the moment at home, I've got some clay from Cuba that someone bought me this year, when I went to see family, and some turkey, and somebody did bring me some clay back from Nepal, but they got stopped because they didn't have the right paperwork. So they're going to reorder. So they went there specially to see family and to bring me this clay back. I spoke to him, and so they're going to reorder it through with the right paperwork. And you know, some countries you can just, you know, because you've got clay is absolutely fine. And with other countries, it can be more of where you have to have the right documents and paperwork. And someone from Nigeria just sent me some clay from his pottery, what's been dug out by local people. So clay's, you know, been gifted, or, you know, sometime if it's an artist like from Nigeria, then I cover all the cost. But when people go on travels, they, you know, someone who saw the installation in Cambridge, they travel a lot, so they've got me clay from India, from Jamaica, where family's from and from gosh, my head's gone blank. But they've got me. But some people like it as part of their travels to get the clay, because it adds an interest to their kind of travel, and plus the stories they collect whilst they're there, the pictures. These are all information I then will be putting onto a website that I've just started, which tell the stories of the clay. So not just about the pieces. Hopefully, there'll be a database for each piece. So it'll be almost educational as well as it travels for young children to be able to scan and be able to see some of the facts about the country, what the local people use it for, what the person was there for who got me the clay, and you know, so it adds in more kind of like interaction, which is a process that I'm doing with the work slowly. This was at Canary Wharf, so they had like, I don't know, 20,000 people go through the building every day. So this was on, it did have cases on, but the photographer's taken it off of the photography. But, you know, so it was, again, a mirror and dark plinths. So this was at the Watts Gallery. And this was from above the balcony, so people really appreciate. And there was, you know, lots of artificial lighting, so you've got beautiful shadows. So I think if you've got a lot of good lighting, you don't need the mirrors. But if you know, if there's not much good lighting, the mirrors are important. And for me, what's been important is how people connect to the clays. And when it was in Manchester, I was doing a talk. Everyone was kind of stood up. And there's a lady in the audience, and she said all through the talk, there's one piece that carried on calling. She was just kind of looking at this one piece. And after the talk, she went up to it, and it was from Poland, and that's where she came from. And when it was in Mezams in Wiltshire, a child went and said what his favourite clay was, and it was from their country. So that's happened quite a few times where people have connected to the clay. And I think this connection and this energy we get from the earth is so important, and something that we don't always realise that we're connected just naturally to without realising. Oh, no, I'm going backwards, sorry. This was in Rochdale Museum. This is one of the earlier exhibitions. This was at Mezams, so this is a natural structure. So my next place I'm hoping is going to be a cathedral, because I love architecture within these lovely churches and cathedrals. So, but this is in a really old barn, one of the biggest thatched roofs surviving in England today. And it's lovely because you've got the contrast of the wood, the stone, and it's laid out on hessian, which is unusual as well. And it's very low, so it's only, I think, a pallet high. And this is here, which I think is very stunning and very different from all the other venues. And again, the shadows, what are projected on the pieces, are really important. This is just really quickly from some normal work, so I just got to see time. So this is normal work I do, which you can see is more refined and more finished. And these pieces, I mean, this was the heaviest piece I did to date a couple of years ago, and this was 95 kilos. So when you're working with such a large amount of clay, you know, the risk you take putting it in the kiln after working on it for in working hours, a couple of months. And then you put...
Before or after carving?
After carving.
So
Then you...
must have been...
Oh, no, sorry, no, oh, you mean the weight is before carving. I think it weighed about 42 or 40, for about 40 kilos after that, but it was still quite heavy. I couldn't...
Get them in the kiln?
That one just about fitted in the kiln.
I mean, you must have to...
I don't do it, my partner does it. His back says everything. Yeah, but yeah, it just about fitted in the kiln, and it fired beautifully. But I made sure I used the clay that I was confident with, because if you're doing a commission of this scale, then you've got... so this one was related to capitals in... the commission was for Reading Museum, and it's looking at the artifacts and the building, what remained of Abbey, Reading Abbey. And they've not got much documentation of drawings and how the building looked because of the way it was destroyed during the... this is a commission for for the Watts Gallery, Mary Watts and George Watts. George Watts was a painter. Mary Watts was, you know, a pioneer for clay, and a lot of stuff she did was amazing. I thought her work was more amazing than George Watts, but I mean, in that time, it was more about a male artist and the importance. But the things that she was doing in clay and educating local women within the area and using local clay, what was dug out within a mile area of the place that the work was created. So I used the same clay that was used 100 years ago, which the gardener had dug out. So it's the same clay she used all those years ago and created this piece. But both George Watts and Mary Watts used a spherical form within their work and their paintings, you know, and sculptures. And also what was lovely about Mary Watts, even of the turn of the century, she was using a lot of virtues and within her work, and spherical domes. And it's the only chapel that I've been to which is created and designed by a woman, and then you know, all the work was done by the women of the village. So if you've not been to the Watts Chapel, it's the most beautiful chapel because it has a very, very peaceful and feminine touch to it. You know, like sometimes when you go to some churches and cathedral, it's quite masculine. They've got the gargoyles, they've got the kind of, but this one, it's got all the figures are smiling, all the women are smiling, the babies, you know, they've not got the stern looks most of the kind of sculptures and carvings have in lots of places. And she connects, even at that time, lots of different cultures within the chapel, which was very unusual. So when I had the exhibition there, the relationship with her work over 100 years ago with my work was quite connected. So I felt, you know, it was a really lovely commission to do.
The mapping really, I'm blown away by it. I'm completely in awe of many elements of what you do. But the mapping, how do you know that across a three-dimensional sphere you're going to reach the same, you know, like in sections? How do you make sure that that's achieved?
Because before I put my design on, I put a grid on,
Yeah.
which I carefully map inside and outside. If it's spherical form, I kind of carefully measure all that out. So then I've got a grid, and then I use that grid. As the basis of where my design's mapped on. So going to the drawings, which are all freehand, I never use any instruments to draw. But when it comes to mapping it onto the piece, then that's when it becomes more technical.
It must be quite hard when it's an interior.
Yeah.
Not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. For me, my earlier work, you know, when I started off carving, I always worked on the top side of the piece. And then there's a beautiful building in Manchester, a neo-Gothic building, John Ryling Library. If anyone's been to it, it's a beautiful building. Yeah, it's just magnificent. And I was always intrigued how the outside structure worked with inside structure. So when you look at the ornateness, it's not there just for the purpose of visual purpose. It's there for construction. And that always intrigued me, how the inside envelope and the outside envelope of a building work together. And I started carving both sides. And then once you start carving both sides, you're constantly working what's happening. So you've mapped your design inside and outside, but you're constantly, if you carved one way inside of one of the design, part of the design, you've got to make sure you carve the opposite way, so you don't create too many weak points, or you don't carve through. I mean, something like this, you can carve through quite heavily, and there'll be points where it's really thin and almost touching the other side, so you can almost see light coming through. But when you're carving on both sides, it's a lot more complex, but it's something that I enjoy the challenge of. So the tops of this are both sides, but as it gets deeper, because it's quite tall, then that can't be carved, because your hands can only go so deep with that kind of opening. Something like this is a solid piece and it's carved as it is. This was an earlier piece, so you can see I never used to carve the underneath. I used to leave that quite simple, but as the work developed, I started carving more heavily, getting more confident within the pieces. But with the spherical pieces, if it's organic design, you've got your design on paper and then you just map it and you can work. I mean, there has to be holes in this to allow the air to get through, because the walls could be quite thick, but there needs to be holes so it doesn't explode in the kiln. This is a very early piece when I was carving both sides, and it was the most complicated piece I did at that time. The V&A were interested in purchasing a piece, so they said to me, when you do a piece you're really happy with, let us see it and then we can decide. And I've been doing lots of shows in my early part of my career, because my work didn't fit into sculpture or ceramics, because sculptures at the early stages I only used clay. So in sculpture they didn't really, at that time, didn't see clay as a sculptural material. And in clay, because I was using a very different thinking process, it was difficult with my work. So when I did all my ceramic shows, I wasn't selling work like the other potters were and or the other ceramicists were. So I do all these shows at my early stages, which were important in my career, because I found I've learned where my work fitted into. And this was a piece I took to a show that I was doing 3 years in the drought in Nottingham. And I did this piece and I thought, this is a piece I'm going to take. And I showed it in the show in Nottingham, knowing it, because I hadn't sold anything there in the 3 years that I was showing there, because people like asking lots of questions and talking about the work. And this at the time was the highest piece that I had on price because of the time it took. And it sold to someone who questioned me each year about my work. And it was a couple, who extensively talked and asked me lots of questions. And they bought this piece, so I didn't have a piece for the V&A, so I had to make a different one. But it was a lovely piece, and it kind of gave me confidence in, people, related to the work or connecting to the work. This was a commission I did for the Queen of Jordan for 2015, I think. So this was all hand carved. Each tile was a bag of clay, which was 12.5 kilos. And I hit out 100 of these by hand. And then each one was mapped on and hand carved. And then it was flown over to America. I was supposed to install, but I had my second child, so I didn't go. What's the scale of that? It's 11 foot by 11 foot. This is one of my favourite clays as well. It's a black clay, and it burnishes really beautifully. And so what I do tend to do with with most of my pieces, I burnish some parts and leave other parts textured, so it reflects and absorbs light differently. This was the early piece, so you can see the burnished parts. This was the early piece. So the forms and the shapes change. This is just showing two different colours of clay. This piece was interesting because this was for an exhibition in London when I was originally doing it, and in my studio before it was done. When we first moved to, for the first few years, it's quite cold in my studio, and to the point it would freeze because all the drafts and this piece, when I was creating it, I didn't realise that it was freezing at night and then defrosting during the day, but because the lines were so fine you couldn't see them, so when it went in the kiln it came out with all these cracks around the piece, and obviously I couldn't submit it for the exhibition that it was supposed to be in, but during the show in Manchester I used the Japanese technique of kintsugi and filled it with gold. And it was beautiful because I got this piece and an earlier piece that were cracked many years before, and got them both filled with gold from a lady who works for Sotheby's. And in the exhibition in Manchester, a lot of people were relating it to their lives, like stretch marks you get when you get pregnant, or scars that you get through life. And so people were really loving the piece, you know, from a mistake. So I always say to people, you know, when things go wrong, you can always make it right in some way. So it's a lovely piece, and it was an important piece to me because because I kind of, you know, I love the piece. So this was another piece because accidents do happen and things go wrong, and this is a commission that in 2008 I did for the Hepworth Museum, and it was creating two pieces, and the Hepworth was being built, and I was asked to create a piece to celebrate when the buildings opened. And so I researched Barbara Hepworth. I knew about her work, obviously, but I didn't know too much about her thinking process, or, you know, about her as a person. So I went to St. Ives and I did the research, and I also researched the architect who's building the building, who did the presentation. So I created these two pieces that I worked on for months and months and months, and both of them blew up in the kiln. And it was a kiln that I wasn't used to using, so it was an issue with the kiln. And but this was one of the fragments, what were left over in the of one of the pieces. When I say I don't do the same piece twice, that was the only piece I made twice, actually. So just because it was a commission. So this is a similar size piece. So when you're working with such big pieces, and if there's any issue with the kiln, if it doesn't go up slowly like it should do, if there's any kind of problem that can make it explode. So this is a lovely piece based on lilies. So over the years I've done commissions which relate to what a client might want, and then I always try and keep the way I work, or the style I work with, within the subject matter. So these are based on calla lilies, and the idea of opening of a vase, or where the flowers meet up as well. This was working with brick clay, so working at different scales. Smaller piece. This is a piece which is in the V&A. This is this was an interesting piece because someone wanted their initials in the piece, which you don't see unless you know they're there. So you see it as a very abstract piece, but he's got the initials of his two daughters and wife. This was a piece, urn, which slightly tilted in the kiln. So I've used that tilt and made a plinth for it. So then the idea of the urn. So people display the work, you know, in different places, and the namings of my normal work are based on whatever the feeling or the design makes me feel, or what plant or what part of architecture it relates to, what kind of natural formation of water, ripples and waves, or landscape. So this is a piece, Mancuni Ruskets, obviously early piece, based on the kind of the rows of houses, terraces you see in Coronation Street. Everyone from the south thinks everywhere in the north looks like Coronation Street, which always surprises me. So this, so working in different scales. I've not put other materials, but working at different scales is the same. You just adapt your tools from, rather than kitchen knives, which I tend to use to carve my work, I use butcher knives for this one, and I use big saws that to shape the piece with, and you just adapt with your tools.
Halima, I think you do some work in glass as well, don't you?
I do, I haven't, I kept it with the virtues. I should have actually put other materials because I do work with stone, and over the years, I started with clay, and people say, it looks like stone, it looks like wood. So people mistake the clay for wood or stone because clay is not normally carved in that way. So someone said, you love stone. I thought, I'm not sure if I would. And I'm not sure if you heard of the sculptor Peter Vandal Page. You might have heard of him. He's very famous. The big sculpture in the Eden Project is one of his. And so I did I went to his studio and tried stone and fell in love with it. And a couple of years later, I got a scholarship to go to Italy to learn how to carve marble and stone with the artisans there. And then I worked with concrete during the time doing the Hetworth Commission. The architect, David Chippenfield, his staff talked about concrete in such a way that I fell in love with it. And in this country, it was always seen as a bad material, but yet in the European countries, it's used a lot in architecture, and it's coming obviously more and more fashionable. So I was really intrigued. So later on, several years after, I got a research grant and I decided to study concrete, and then wood. Wood was another material I thought I'd try. I've tried hand carving it, which I've done a few sculptures, and I've tried it with the chainsaw as well. And I much prefer the chainsaw, because you're almost like a knife in butter with the chainsaw, so it's lovely. I like working in wood. But the processes that I use, that I was showing you, are the same with all the materials. I think what really helped me with loosening up with my work, because up until 2006, I never used a curved line in my work. Everything was angular. And then been inspired by some tsunami prints in the local museum where I came from in Blackburn, I started putting curves into my work first time. And that obviously got me thinking differently about the way to use the tool, because when you're carving rigid lines and angles. And then my time spent in Japan, my work was always directed by my design, so the form was dictated by the design I created for that form. So it was very precise, it's very controlled. But whilst I was in Japan, they expected me to throw on a wheel. And I did 2 hours in my time in university throwing in the wheel. And but for me to use the clay, they said, how could you be doing sculpture in clay if you can't throw on a wheel? Because that's how they start. Like in the European countries, we learn how to draw and then go on to abstract. And so I tried everything and put everything into throwing on the wheel, and everything was flying off the wheel. But I caught a few of them in motion, and I thought I'll try carving into them because my time was limited there. And that process of carving into these really deformed, almost forms that were ripping off the wheel, kind of the form started to dictate the design. So I know, so that got me completely thinking differently, because I was so controlled in the way I was thinking that working with these pieces with holes where the walls weren't even really loosened me up. So when I started working with like 14-foot oak pieces, what were organic, or pieces of stone that had come off cliffs, from cliffs. I started using the natural formation of the forms within the overall design because, and I don't think I would have been able to do that so successfully if I hadn't had that experience in Japan. So I always say to students, I always say to people, you never stop learning. You're always constantly challenging and pushing your practice. So, when you have a new commission, a new project, it's always, it's always pushing you. And I like my work to always push me.
Any more questions?
Just got a question.
You have.
So I know in the past that you said that you've got dyslexia, but you connect maths and geometry to art in a really beautiful way. When you were young and kind of discovering your style and your art, did you find that was encouraged? Like how did you manage to connect those two within, I guess, education? Was it afterwards?
Well, I grew up in a very strict, Muslim upbringing, and I suppose art wasn't an option. There's other plans for my future that my parents had, and but sadly both my parents died when I was young, and then I suppose my kind of path to my life changed. But I was always very creative at a young age, but I never saw it as a. And then I was very lucky in one of my final secondary schools. I met my art teacher was very inspiring, and he allowed me the freedom that I needed and wanted, and really nurtured my creativity and my, my questioning. Because he'd set a project for the whole class, and I'd question him and say, "But can I not do it this way?" And I write this in the book. He writes an essay in the book about me as a 15-year-old. But, and as a good teacher, he allowed me that kind of exploration of working it out my way rather than the way he was teaching. And he says he learnt things from me. And I think because he allowed me that time and that space to develop. And I think because English was my second language and my parents didn't speak English, at the time of growing up and the school system, I didn't know I was heavily dyslexic. I just thought it was a cultural thing, and being left-handed. So I think I used the opposite side of my brain quite a lot. So so maths, I loved maths at school. I loved, I was always in the top class of maths throughout school, and it was just. I didn't connect them both together then, but because I just was loving doing art, and every time I had a spare lesson after school, I'd go and do extra art. And this idea of making a possible career in art was kind of on the horizon, but I always thought I'd have to do another job to support, and that's what I thought up until in my early 20s. Mid-20s, I always thought I'd have to, but I think I lived frugally and worked hard at my art, and I've worked as an artist for 25 years. So I think the maths and art was just a natural thing that happened when I was developing this work.
I've got a little follow-up. Is that okay? Just on like how is there anything that you would encourage young people who are trying to find their style? Is there like I don't know. Is there a secret? Do you have the secret?
Well, I always tell young children or students, or when I go to universities, because to work on what they're strong at and to work at what they're passionate at rather than what's expected. Because I think society tries to fit everyone in the box, and the university that I was at when I did my dissertation, it was so hard. I didn't understand why I was struggling, where other students were doing their dissertation and they'd do it before the Christmas, and I handed it in. The day it had to be handed in, like in the Easter, and not realising why I was struggling. And the lecturer who taught for many years said it was the worst dissertation he read in his teaching career. And so when he used to ask me to come back to talk to his MA students, and give lectures at various points in that. I always started off with that, just to tell people they don't have to be good at everything. Is about working and following a passion, and also not to follow a fashion, because fashions come in and out. Is about making art, making music, making, writing, creative writing from the heart rather than, because then it's more true, it's more original. It's, because it's easy to follow someone or to copy, to make art on a regular basis, on a on a basis that comes naturally, is when it comes true from your heart. Because I think if it's not natural to you, then it's always going to be stalled, and that's when a lot of changes happen. So I'm pleased to say my work has stayed consistent throughout my time, but has changed and developed through links through my original work. Any other questions?
I'm very intrigued about people bringing clay back. That you did say that they divided it between their luggage. Did they go with the intention of bringing clay back, or did they get somewhere and think, let's take some clay back from Halima? And what happens when you go through customs? They go through everything. And you just say, it's clay for Halima. And nobody says, you what? You did mention that some has to have paperwork. I'm just intrigued by the psychological thing of thinking, let's get some clay, let's take it back. You take that amount, you take that amount, you take that amount, you take that amount. I'm just intrigued by the people bringing suitcases full of clay.
Some people, because over the years, like I was saying at the beginning, we travelled, I had exhibitions around Europe, and I'd pick up clays and stuff like that in the bordering countries, but the majority is what people bought me, and it varies from, because it's art material. People say, yeah, it's clay, it's art material. So I can have clay posted from Greece. Whilst I was in Greece, I couldn't get any clay from the town we were at, but then I got a number of where the clay was being distributed, and they sent it, so that could be posted. And the clay from South Korea was costing quite a lot to post because of the posting system. But so the lady said, I'm visiting my brother next year, I'll bring it back as extra luggage. So it's declared as art material for a project. And some people want more paperwork, like the lady who got me the clay from Africa and India. But when she went to Jamaica, they wanted a lot of paperwork. So, she's a writer and editor, so so I sent her all the information. So, she was able to do the paperwork to fit into what they required for it to come out. So it varies. And the one what came from, so it depends on each country. So like this one in Nepal, from India, it's fine. But from Nepal, I don't know, it varies. But there's not normally a problem, but every now and then there is.
And on the clay, is there ever a country where you wish you could find a clay and you've not been able to sort of...
Well, here, I think there's nearly 50 countries, and I'm hoping there's about 60 pieces here, and I'm trying to get clay from every country. So there's still the installation's going to be a lot bigger. So as the installation travels, it'll be going to bigger venues and places. There's a website that I started last year, which has the countries that we're still need clay from. And sometimes people go and see the show or see the work, like the Costa Rica clay. The lady who came from Costa Rica saw the installation and wanted to put a piece from her country, what she's living in now. And so people want to be part of the project. So people want that connection of, because they like them or fall in love with the message it's sending, because to say that we're all connected from the earth. We come from the earth, we go back to the earth. As a human race, that virtue is what connects us. So people, because they're moving around and living in different countries, they have family in different countries, and this idea of togetherness is quite important to them.
It must be like you're traveling by EasyJet. And your suitcase doesn't fit in, you say, it's clay. Because usually on EasyJet, you just wear it. you know, when it doesn't fit in that slot, you know, it's clay. That's lovely.
12 kilos, yeah, normally it's quite small, 12, 15 kilos is the way.
That weighing thing, you know, you think, okay, I've just got 28 pounds. And then you say, oh, it's clay.
You know, people have that, like the one from Iraq, you know, people have their stories about, you know, being stopped and being checked for drugs or for other things. And the clay from Cuba, you know, where she's just carried it through, she said it's clay, they're fine with it. And she's carried it on her hip because that's her hand luggage, yeah, so, yeah. So it varies from different place to different place. Again, the Cuban, yeah. Normally, as art materials, fine, and people like the one from Costa Rica. I think she had 2 children who were coming down. They're coming to visit family in Manchester, so they all carried a little lump of clay in their back. Well, it distributed the weight evenly. But yeah, no, I mean, I think I've been very lucky because people who resonate with the project and the message it's sending, you know, it makes their time on holiday or while they're away a bit more exciting because they go and visit pottery, they go and visit a village they've never visit before. I mean, the clay what should have come from Nepal, which he's going to try and send it this time with the paperwork because they've come back. You know, that clay was all the old ancient monuments are made out of that clay. That's the same clay the village uses. So he took some amazing pictures, you know, which would be part of the story of that clay. And, you know, he took pictures of the person as they were digging it out. So it's got a beautiful story to it. And he brought me a bit of pottery back from that country to show me what the clay was fired like. And that, so, but he said, don't worry, we'll get it. So it's like, but eventually, when my children are a bit older, maybe I'll travel out and get dig it out myself.
Is that intention to dig something out? You know, when you're packing, you think, you know, razors, deodorant, shovel. You know, it's having that intention. Know that, you know.
Well, you know, a lot of time people don't dig it out themselves. They go to local villages. Like I was trying to get some clay from Cyprus, and the artist who lives out there said, "Oh, we don't really have clay because everyone uses clay from Germany and France, where the clay's more refined and more beautiful to use. Not beautiful. What's the word? More successful to use." But then, as he looked into it, there's a little, really old village where the nuns once a year dig up clay to make things to sell during the festival, what happens once a year in the little village. So when we go out to see them, I'll visit the village and get the nuns to help me dig some out. Yeah. So, go.
Would you find that you end up with sort of a certain colour range more often than not? You know, it seems like really harmonious and it's lovely the way the colour goes from the sort of purest white right through to the darkest. Is it more often that you'd get a terracotta, or it is quite hard to find ones that are on more extreme ends of the colour spectrum?
Terracotta is the most, I think.
Yeah.
But the same like the whites and the yellows are as well. I you know, beggars can't be choosers. I accept what I can, whatever they can get. But if I have a choice, I think the clay, what's come from Cuba, he said was black. And so I did a little test firing on it, and it wasn't, it was terracotta. So maybe I need to fight higher to get it black. And the clay that was coming from Nepal, that was, a lot of them are terracotta, but it depends what's in the ground, because when I was, somebody in Shropshire, a lady was digging to put a new septic tank in. When they dug the ground, there was blue clay, which is very famous around the Midlands. And then when they were putting a new flower bed, just a couple of yards away, there was yellow clay. So it shows you how different the clay is from one part of the garden to another. So just that clay, that colour clay doesn't represent that country. It's just what's dug out from. Yeah, and the lady who got me the Costa Rican clay, she said there's another waterfall and the clay is black. So she's bringing me some black clay back in September. So black is so as the installation gets bigger, then I'll take the double ones out, or spin the installation out. But all the bits that I carve from the clay, and once I finish the installation, I'll be mixing together to create one body, a united piece. And I thought, I'll make a nice big piece. But when I actually added all because I take out at least a third, if not more, of the clay of each piece. So when you reconstitute that, I thought, I worked it out, and it's quite a large amount of clay. So I've been saving over the years all these parts that I carve out, but then I'll send to a proper factory to make sure it's mixed. But I'll make a very large sculpture, what represents, a united piece at the end. Yeah, and it's a long project, but it's an exciting project because obviously the stories you get and the people, how they got it, why they were there. It adds, and this website I'm doing, which you can see because it's live, it has the pieces, but I've not got all the stories in yet. And there'll be QR codes that people can then, whichever country they're interested in, will be able to see about the person who got the clay, about what the local people use it for, and maybe 10 facts about, which will run through all the countries. So it becomes, and then we can see the similarities and the beautiful connections that we have, regardless of culture or background or religion. The things that, the basic things that connect us. So, they're not here allowed to touch the clay, and the thing about it, I'm a very tactile person. Growing up in Manchester, I had to touch all the terracotta moulded buildings or the carved stone buildings. I always used to play with the shapes and so I like to touch things. And when people say you can't touch them, people do automatically walk up, and I just saw a little child do it this morning, and so I said, don't touch, you're not allowed to touch. I think our instinct is to visually absorb and to feel what we look. We feel experiences through touching as well as seeing, and so as an automatic reaction, people want to touch them. So. Okay. But listen, thank you so much. Jonathan's bought some books, so I should talk. The book is 25 years of me working carving and how the different materials were introduced over my career, and it has different professional essays, and it also has an essay from my teacher, my wonderful teacher at school, describing me as a 15-year-old, and it also has an essay from a friend who saw the studio we're currently at, what it was like when we first moved in and what it's like now. So he talks about the evolution of a studio space. So when I started my career in Lancashire, I was in a one-bedroom flat. And from that one-bedroom flat, I made my commission piece for the V&A, for the Walker Gallery, for the Hepworth, for various other museums in that one-bedroom flat. And then it talks about the evolution of when we moved to our first house and the dining room becoming the studio, and then hiring different spaces, and then being in the wonderful studio I'm in now. And for me, that was an important essay because it tells artists and wannabe artists that you don't need a magnificent space to work in. You can be in a very small space and create amazing and important work. So I put that essay in for that purpose. And there's an essay about, my thought process and the designing. So that's in that book. And the small booklet is about virtues of unity, and a lovely essay by Andrew Labyrinth, who was the art critic for Spectator for 25 years. And he writes a lovely essay in there, and so that's the booklet. So if you'd like to purchase one, I'll try and use the machine. I've never used it before, so.
I'm not on commission, but I can say the book is beautifully illustrated as well.
Well, I think as books go, I think as a visual person, it was important to have a lot of visuals in it. And for artists, that's important. And plus, telling a story just with words is great, but if you're a visual person, you need to relate. And for me, putting lots of images is something that I wanted. So, thank you.